Hello, it's Lauren Ratcliffe. Today's video title is called The Dark Side of Being Autistic in the 80s and 90s. It was not easy. Being raised in the 1980s and being diagnosed with a disorder in the autism category. What were my symptoms as a kid besides the meltdowns? Dirty bathrooms with the black toilet seats, especially if it smelled and there was no soap or toilet paper in the bathroom. I'd hold it, and I'm not afraid to say this little TMI tidbit. And later on in elementary school, I learned the side effects of holding in everything when I needed to use the bathroom. And it was at that point that I decided to start going whenever I felt the urge. And I was also really fearful of just weird stuff, even though I knew that it wasn't going to hurt me in any way. And I was pushed to get over it. I was very fearful of plant leaves and fearful of sticking my head fully underwater at any pool or lake, and didn't learn how to swim until I was 11. I had comorbid disorders like tic disorders, even though I was never diagnosed with Tourette's syndrome and obsessive compulsive disorder and panic attacks. I had symptoms of all the major anxiety disorders, but I didn't show any symptoms of attention deficit disorder. I had unrealistic jealousy over stuff that I didn't really understand. I had a really good rote memory. It shocked my family and my teachers when I would describe something that I could remember. I was also a really good reader and excellent at spelling, but seriously struggled academically from kindergarten through cosmetology school and college with math. And it was so frustrating and embarrassing. When I was around like toddler age up until I was almost in second grade, I had a fascination with about how the fan blades worked, and I just craved the sensation about how it felt when a fan was blowing against my face. And I was interested in fans so much that one time I tried to tear up my grandmother's portable electric heater just to see its fan blades in it. I was always very blunt about speaking, honest to a fault, as my mom said, and never took teasing and expected others to be the same way. I was never afraid to fully speak my mind truthfully, but I was told on one hand how to say things nicely and that you should never lie. But then on the flip side, I was told that if you say something that's inappropriate, even if it's truthful, it could potentially hurt someone's feelings. But at the end of the day, I don't think that's a bad thing, because the truth will be made known eventually. Certain social rules are adopted by society, meaning you have to act or dress a certain way in different situations. With me, what you see is what you get. I still have a black and white mindset. Now, how has all of these affected me and what others perceived me out of misunderstandings? People misunderstood me as being stuck up and mean. especially if I had a meltdown, but also if I didn't make the right eye contact, because you have to make eye contact at all times when in conversations. And in a social situation, like say when we would go out to my uncle's house for a visit on the weekends, or if we had company here and I got bored of something, I would just wander off into another room and find something else to entertain myself, especially if I felt tired or depressed. I was told that this was rude to do. I did get complimented occasionally as being really smart, but struggled greatly with my sensory processing and my anxiety disorders that seriously affected my ability to succeed. I was considered lazy when it came to academics because of all of this, because nobody understood autism back then. I can remember several times when I was in 8th grade and our history teacher at the time had us reading certain chapters to study, and my interpretation of reading something was to read the whole chapter word for word, and I would try to read it, and halfway through I would just not even remember what I read and couldn't make it through. And I was complaining one day about not having good enough grades in my history class and about an assignment, and my dad asked me if I read the complete chapter, and I said no, I didn't. And my idea of success was to never take a break from anything except to eat or sleep, and I would just crash. I have trouble motivating myself to do anything that I find uninteresting to me, especially when it comes to chores like housework. My family was also worried about me not being able to live independently and do stuff like getting a job, driving, dating, and getting married until certain skills were mastered. For autistics like me, I personally feel like this created more harm than good, because sometimes I feel like you're better off to just let a person go on to the next step. My mom and dad were raised in an era where they believed that you had to learn certain skills before you could move on to doing stuff like driving or getting a job. I still did better with just going on to achieve a job if I were, or college, even if I were able to work or date, versus just learning how to do the basic stuff at home. Because sometimes a person can function better out in the real world, meaning that it may be better off just go ahead and let them experience stuff and then come back to that later. Communication techniques, teaching skills, discipline, and punishment and reward work different for autistic minds than what they do for normal people, and it should be tailored to each individual person. And all of this is why we should do this, because autistic minds work differently than that of a normal person. And it's not because that they're not trying to do good, they just don't perceive things the way a normal person does. And my parents and my teachers tried teaching techniques like this to me, and I would try to make sense of it, and if you didn't do it exactly right, it's like you're not listening, which is not the case. When in reality, I couldn't understand things like a normal person did, because so little was understood about autism and other psychiatric illnesses there were limited studies that were done in the 1980s and 90s that revealed that teenagers and young adults with any psychiatric disorder were at higher risk for not taking care of their health, unwanted pregnancies, less likely to pursue college. I believe this personally about myself because of my black and white mind. In the 80s and 90s, a higher education was valued and enforced and was considered the ticket to success in life. But even back then, resources were limited, and you had to have a certain ACT score to get into certain colleges or to even go to college at all. And for further education, if you wanted to get master's degrees, the GRE was required. And now people aren't even taking the GREs and MCATs to get into higher education. I wasn't aware of this, but colleges back when I was younger had resources for students with learning disabilities, and when I learned of it, I was more than determined to use those services if it were going to help me, even if it took me longer to succeed, because I was not going to get nothing less than a 4-year degree. How did I navigate all of this? The best way that I learned to deal with everything was my extensive research. And back then, we had encyclopedias, childcraft books, and I read a lot of the teen magazines and young adult advice books, as well as books about fictional but realistic characters like the Babysitters Club and Sweet Valley Twins and Sweet Valley High. So resources were very limited, and the only way that we can actually get any information about anything was to not only look it up in childcraft books and encyclopedias, but we had to go to the nearest library to look stuff up. And when I was growing up, we didn't have a library in our county, and it would have taken us to drive to libraries in nearby counties to look stuff up. And when my mom was younger, all they had was a bookmobile that come once a month or every 2 weeks. And also, we got limited information from the newspapers and by watching TV. And if we were to hear of anything, also the radio, it was good to know. We didn't get internet in my era until like the early 90s. And it was working on it in the 80s. In the late 90s, like 1996, the computers at our school got internet. And one time we had to use them when I was a senior, and the teacher wanted us to research some information for our science class, and I researched other information that I thought was important. And in 99, about 2 or 3 months after I graduated from high school, we got our first computer, and back then it was dial-up. And what did I do when we first got our computer? I started looking up everything that was important to me. If I had any concerns about anything, I would go look it up on the computer. And anything that I learned about all my health issues, it was when we got the internet, and it was a blessing for me because that way I could learn all about my health problems more so than what I did prior to getting the internet. And in conclusion of this video, I firmly believe it's okay to be a bit different from societal norms. With my research on autism, I have discovered that autistic people in times past, even though they might not have been socially acceptable, have left important impacts on society. Yes, I felt frustrated with my autism because I wanted to be accepted and often felt down on myself. Because of my experiences, I want to educate others and let them know they're okay. And the most important goal for anyone on the autism spectrum is to be happy, healthy, and know what's important. Thank you and goodbye.